Um, so, Ryan, you and I had the conversation at commencement about the need for a certificate that would be essentially a human services or mental health, or for human services for the first responder, or mental health for the first responder.
Yeah.
Um, have you put together an outline of what you're looking at? How it would obviously we know how it's going to apply towards the criminal justice students, but have you put together anything thus far?
Nope.
Okay.
Nope. Waiting to get ideas, or waiting to get consensus, or waiting to get how should we go forward?
Okay. I think that I guess the first place to start would be, I think that the most important part was, how many students do you think we could get to go into the program? Because we got to make it viable. And then, can it be used? Is this a certificate that's accompanying a degree, or is this a certificate that is a standalone certificate that can be used? And can somebody get employment out of that certificate?
Yeah, well, my head is telling me that, and I just heard about this, that New York City has just gotten a new policy that in crisis, or in what looks like it might be a mental health call, mental health worker rides along with the cop that goes to that call. And I'm thinking, if other forces decide they're going to take up that model, then yeah, there'll be plenty of work.
So I can tell you this: under the new post bill, the professional standards for police officers in the state of Massachusetts, there is going to be a need for. It's still developing. Obviously, the bill's in place, but the committees haven't come together. I was told this week that there is a high recommendation that officers will have to have some type of certification in mental health, or that they will have they'll have somebody as a ride along. Obviously, if you're looking at, say, the town of Oxford, Massachusetts, my town cannot afford to have mental health providers ride along in the cruisers. So their only option is going to be to certify police officers and provide the training for the officers that are currently employed.
Okay.
So that because all of us have been through academic affairs at one level or another, and we know that when we go through academic affairs committee, that's a question that's going to be asked. Can this lead to a degree? Can this lead to a fruitful position? Can they gain? Is there gainful employment along with it? And I think piggybacking off of the post bill is probably our best approach. And in your example of New York as well. Paul, do you have any thoughts on that?
I hadn't really thought about your angle that, major police department could do it, but a smaller department. So, how much curriculum changes have to be the MPTC to do that? Is that going to be a separate training course?
It's going to, from what I understand from Marcel, he's the standards chair on Maple, is that they're talking about having it as a separate training. It would be part of that these individuals would have to kind of go through what I just went through a couple of weeks ago with the mental health first responder. It would have to be something similar to that, but obviously a little bit more extensive. But if we were to start developing something and get ahead of the game on this, get ahead of Boston on this and say, hey, we'd like to be your model, and this is what we're offering at Northern Essex, that might be the best approach, that we could be the model and have it aligned with either a human services or an EMT or a paramedic or a criminal justice degree.
Yeah, I know what Kevin Fleece has his area with a human services concentration in it. And he consulted me on it, and I told him, okay, we should run these 3 courses in it, and then that's all I have to do with it. And so that's one way to look at it. The other way I think to look at it is, do you want to have a CJ degree with a concentration in that area, or is it just a flat certificate?
I mean, I think for right now, to have a concentration, I'm not even sure what that process is. I think maybe the first step would be a certificate, and Kevin talked to me about the certificate he wanted, and it was right about the time that there was an incident where somebody who was deaf was not a very good outcome. And I know legislation was posed. I don't think it ever passed. So I'm not sure, maybe it did.
That's with regards to Kevin, I remember that because he and I discussed it as well. But the thing with the track and the trend that's changing in the state of Massachusetts with regards to how much is there an education requirement? Is there a human services element to it? I'll be honest with you, it's sitting on the Maple meetings and the statewide committee meetings. We're moving into an area where human services is a critical element, both in lacking in departments and there's a need for it under the post bill. The public has already made an outcry this past year since George Floyd's death. There's been a huge shift in the call for defunding the police, and I've been on the side of the argument that says, no, we don't defund the police, we fund them more, but by funding them, we provide them with more training and more opportunities to meet the demands that the community is calling for. And that's where the post bill came out of, was the past years, a lack of diversity, a lack of human service training, a lack of empathy all around. It's pretty interesting where it's going. And I can tell you that it's kind of like that meeting I held last summer, Paul, with regards to the diversity course. And I said to the group, I said, let's get ahead of this before the state tells us we have to do this, or somebody outside of higher ed says this is what you need, or outside of the criminal justice industry says this is what we want you to have. Wouldn't it be best to have, as I said to the group, wouldn't it be best for all of us to collaborate with the faculty in other areas of our institution to say, what do you recommend? Brian, you're our peer at the college, but you're also a citizen of our community. You're watching the same news that we're watching. You more than likely have a position on the past year, if not the past 15 years, all the way to Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri. What do you see personally? What do you see as something that, as a citizen of our community and somebody that is a provider of mental health care and human services all under that umbrella, what do you see that police officers or correctional officers, probation, parole, what do you see the criminal justice system as lacking from your perspective?
Well, I think you said the word empathy, and I think that's it. But I also think that a few officers are getting the rest. There's like a stereotypic blanket being thrown over blue. And I think it's only a small percentage of people that, for one reason or another, don't have the idea of fairness or diversity, or they've grown up with fears that are, founded on some incident in their life or something they heard at the dinner table or something like that. And that makes it really difficult for decent people to, who happen to be officers, to to exist in that position. I mean, you guys know what it's like more than I do about what it's like to be on a force and having to buy in just so your daily life is calm enough that you can go back and forth to work. If there's people that you answer to or people that are peers of yours, or you first get in there and you have older guys telling you all kinds of crap and this is the way you got to think, blah, blah, blah. And I think that probably happens too. And I know that my son, the son that I lost, he was a firefighter, and he was subjected to that when he went into that paramilitary organization.
I mean, there's certainly in any organization, the formal and the informal, and
Yep.
maybe the best way to describe it, my first time I rode in a patrol car, you get all the information, the rules and regs, and you go out in the car and then you sit down and, with the old timer and
Here's what it really is.
all that bullshit. And, and by the way, we're going to 7-Eleven and you're buying the booze for your party tonight. And knowing full well that buying alcohol in a uniform is a violation of rules and regs. What was that? That was a test, where and that can be difficult to overcome because some values are really entrenched.
Yeah.
So what in HUS would you recommend that if I was a police department, Brian, and I said, Brian, I need you to come in and provide some training for my officers, what critical courses and content do you think that would be sufficient that you could say, yes, I certify these officers based upon the training that I've provided?
So I think it's a new course. And I think it's a new course because there are elements that we teach in human services in several courses that would be integral to having, if we're going to talk about working with officers, and that would be integral to that training, like motivational interviewing, like solution-focused, thought, like crisis management, understanding mental health and co-occurring disorders, and de-escalation techniques and all that stuff.
Interesting.
I mean, I taught at the prison, at the jail up in Middleton years ago, mid to late 90s. It was most of the officers and some of the staff. And number one, I was amazed at how many people had jobs because their uncle was a state senator. But I was even more amazed at the level of attitude that I got, resistance to those kind of things.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I think that's a fight. I think that's a difficult thing, but that's going to be there. I mean, there's no ducking it.
Yeah, well, that's exactly what you're talking about, the time period that I was hired in. And anybody, I mean, Paul, you and I've talked about it, but prior to, say, 2004, you didn't get a job in any of the county facilities unless you knew somebody.
Yeah.
And you think of it like this. I was just actually had this conversation with the president of Maple. I was asked by Sheriff Glotus in 2004 to put together a promotional exam for sergeants and lieutenants. And he put me on the committee and named me the chair of the committee. And there was only 3 of us, and we developed the promotional exams. And so I went to sit for the exam, and he pulled my name out of the list to take the exam. And I said, I went to his office. I said, Jeff, I was just told that you took my name off the schedule to sit for the exam. And he said, yeah, that wouldn't be fair if you sat for the exam. You know all the answers. And I said,
at the point?
I said, but without the exam now, I'm not eligible to be promoted. He goes, should have thought of that. And I said, well, that's not very fair or right. Why would you have me create the exam? He said, Scott, he goes, you've got everything. You've got everything that anybody would want to promote. But you're missing one important thing. And I said, what's that? He goes, you don't support me. I go, what are you talking about? I don't support you. I said, I voted for you. He goes, no, you voted for me, but you don't support me. I've never seen a donation towards my campaign. And I said, well, I guess that's all done then. I'll be going back to the blocks. But that was, I remember when guys came in, you'd say to them, how'd you get the job? I just applied. You're a liar, because you can't just apply for the job. You have to have somebody. So the resistance that you would get, Brian, is that it's such a tight-knit community back then.
Yeah.
It's not like that now. And there's most of the sheriff's departments, 3/4 of them actually have a policy that you or a family member cannot donate to the sheriff's campaign. All the new sheriffs have implemented that type of policy, so it eliminates nepotism and cronyism out of the picture. You can't even have a sibling work at the same department.
Mm.
But getting back on track, I think that we've got some discussing on whether or not, obviously, Brian, you mentioned that there's a possible new course, but there's 2 tracks that we're looking at and I understand Paul's reluctance on creating a concentration because of the need for BHE approval on a new concentration. But a certificate, a standalone certificate that we could funnel students into might be something that's more responsive and in keeping in mind that the idea of the certificate it would be piggybacking on the post bill and your New York model. And I'm sure that we did some more investigations. It's not Massachusetts and New York are the only 2 states. I know legislation has been passed across most of the country in the past year on police reform. So I'm sure if we did a little bit of digging, we'd find some more examples besides New York. But I think that personally, I believe that there's a need for this. And it really comes down to how it would be structured and how it would look like. What would that certificate look like? And I like your idea when we first spoke about this, is that it's not mental health for the criminal justice professional, it's mental health for the first responder.
Right.
So that way our students from other disciplines can jump into it as well.
Right.
But Paul and I would be pushing students towards it as a resume builder and as a critical component towards the changes that we will see out of Boston from the post bill.
Yep.
So I guess it really comes down to structure of the certificate at this point is what courses that you feel, how many courses would be necessary, how many discipline courses are required for a certificate? Does anybody have the answer on that?
To get financial aid, you need 16 credits.
So just a credit over 5 courses, correct?
Yep. And you have a practicum, and it's usually 4 credits. So I would say that was where your 16th credit comes from.
Okay, so 4 classes and 1 practicum?
Possible. Well, 4 classes, including 1 practicum.
Including 1 practicum.
Yeah, because the practicum would have some class time in it also.
Okay.
Yeah.
Kind of like Paul's internship course.
Yeah.
Now, here's a question for you. If a student did this, could the CRJ 291 be substituted for a practicum? Paul?
I'm not sure. I'd have to think about that. So, if they took,
Or vice versa.
I mean, Brian, what does your course do? The practicum?
Oh, the practicum? It's 150 hours in an agency that we usually match students with, and over the course of a semester. Depending on what certificate or degree you're in, there's 2 of them, but some of the certificates only have 1, and it's still 150 hours per semester, spread over 13, 14, 15 weeks, and 2 hours a week of class time which is usually a lot of feedback in small group, and often because of what we do, I put in a fairly good amount of how to do documentation and how to write a treatment plan and that kind of stuff.
Because I'm, just, I mean, in our internship, it's 120 hours. But you can choose between a law enforcement agency and community service. And we kind of recommend they do both.
Yep.
It's better on a resume. I don't know. I'd have to give it some more thought, but I mean, it just, in the internship, it's not only internship, they're writing a capstone research paper, they're doing resumes and cover letters, they're doing.
Yeah, it's like HUS 250 is for me.
So
the seminar at the end.
So I know I probably should take, what's the name of the 250?
Yeah, 250 is like what you're describing, HUS 250. Our practicums run, there's actually, we have 5 different practicum courses that are specific to something. So the substance use disorder one, which I think would probably be the one we use, 191 and then 192.
I'm brainstorming at the moment as you guys are thinking.
And because we're talking about your own, your own kind of methodology here, 150 hours could actually be 120 hours. I mean, there's no, I have some, my accreditation entities demand that we do 150 hours. And so that's how that came from, but we could definitely, shorten that up. It wouldn't be a big deal.
I mean, but to end up with a criminal justice associate and a certificate, how many additional classes would they have to take to get the certificate?
5 plus the credit.
My guess is they wouldn't have to be additional because a couple would, a new one would, and a designated practicum would. But the rest, you could use existing courses, and when a student takes them there, they qualify to be in the certificate and they qualify to be in the associate degree. All my stuff's like that. When you take one, you can take both.
That works for the CJ too, but this is a cross-discipline approach.
Right.
Yeah, if you take the right courses, Brian, and you can get the certificate, you don't even have to take an extra class.
Right.
So this would be taking 5 extra classes to get the certificate?
16 credits, 15 credits.
16 credits. To get financial aid, you need 16. So that's the rationale for that, I think. And so, yeah, I don't think it's 5 courses, Paul. I think you could use existing courses that you already have. Like if you had 101 CJ, that could go into the certificate and it goes into your associate degree.
I guess that's what we probably need to map out.
Yeah.
How that would map over.
Yeah, because that we do a lot of, I have 5 certificates and 1 associate degree, and most of the courses you take in the certificate program fit into the associate degree at the same time.
All right. Well, let me, I'll take a look at your course descriptions, and if you can come up with just a tentative what you think the certificate would look like, and then we can just move from there.
I think that's probably the best approach, is mapping it out first, and then putting our proposal together and submitting it to Kelly is before the 30th.
Of September, yeah.
Yeah, just because I'm sure the 3 of us are in agreement that whatever the 3 of us ever submit to Kelly, it's a check.
Yeah.
Move it along.
Yeah, which is why I'm so concerned about what's going to happen.
Yeah. You hear anything about the VP?
No.
I've heard nothing.
No. Nothing.
About candidates or anything?
But I know that it was advertised in highered.com.
Okay.
So it's out there. They're collecting CVs and resumes. But it's setting up when's the hiring committee going to be put together?
I know, I mean, Bill's gone June 30th, right?
Maybe Grace would come back and do it.
I thought about that too.
So would I.
Yeah,
That would be, the only people that would have a problem with it would be the people that are in student services.
That's correct.
The rest of us would be like, yes, take her. So, yeah, so I think that probably that's our next step is mapping it out and then kind of like having another meeting once it's mapped out. Just a rough outline of what courses would probably be best to fit into it. And then probably just meeting back up again and finalizing it. And I can put it all together as a draft and to send off to Kelly if that's what you guys want. And then going from there. I mean, I'm like I said, I'm not worried about Kelly approving it. It's just I want to make it the best possible thing. And I think that one of the things that that I can do in the next week or so is get some more information on the subcommittees on the post to see what they're actually looking specifically for. So that way it's that we're aligning in some ways to the state's new law, and there's going to be new branches and bigger government.
Maybe one of you guys should check in with the bigger forces around the valley, Methuen, Lawrence, Lowell, Haverhill, see what they have to say. Maybe up into Portsmouth, I don't know. Maybe they could give us some guidance. And I also think coming up with a few student learning outcomes would tell us what the courses have to look like.
I mean, I think the local departments are going to have to wait and see with how the post thing comes down.
Yeah, well, I'm more thinking about, Paul, what their attitude about it is. Do they think they need something, and if they do, what is they think they need? And I think if we can get an idea of what that sounds like, maybe then we have a direction to go in.
I can also reach out to get a temperature on the MPTC, Paul.
Okay.
And see what curriculum changes there. You and I haven't spoken about this in the last couple of days. I've just had a flood of information over the past 48 hours. They're running around with their heads cut off right now. They're doing the curriculum over again. So what you and I have been discussing about new and old curriculum, it's going to be new. It's going to be old, new, and newer curriculum.
I think I said, John Skipka, who's the director of, police training in New Hampshire. He says it's just you're just chasing your tail.
Yeah.
The governor wants one thing, legislators want something else, the ACLUs want this, and you put something in place. No, we got to change it because the governor doesn't want, it's insane.
And there's always competing powers that don't want anything.
Right.
Yeah. I mean,
They have to pay for it. They're not about to.
Yeah.
Well, you know what?
Surprisingly,
Brian, the biggest opposition doesn't come from the Massachusetts Chief of Police Association. They're actually behind this, and they were very upset that the education standard wasn't added into the post bill. It was removed.
Yeah.
And it's the officers, the line officers union, not the superior officers union, not the lieutenants and the captains. It's the privates and sergeants union that is against everything, no matter any type of change. And that's where they're getting some kickback. But when you kind of reach out to the Mass Chiefs Associations or the Mass Sheriffs Association, all of the sheriffs and the chiefs of police are like, yep, let's do this. Put it all out there. And that's where I knew that speaking to Maple and a few people that were involved with post in the MPTC is that the mental health is a huge component in response to this. It's dramatic that you've got officers that are openly not making arrests now. That are, I'm just driving my job is to drive around, my cruiser and to pull people over and to help out with car accidents. That's it. I don't want to make any calls. You know, the only call, I have a friend that's at Worcester PD. He's like, the only place I'll make an arrest is the domestic violence because I'm mandated by law to take somebody out of the house.
I mean, it's U-boat commander, run silent, run deep, you know, so.
All right, so I'll get some feedback from Maple Post and the MPTC. The MPTC in Post will cover the regional expectations of what they're looking at. Maple has that futuristic look, and I'll report back to both of you by this time next week, and that should give us an idea of what courses that we could possibly put together.
Okay,
All right.
will do.
Sound good?
Yep.
All right, I'm gonna stop the recording right now.